The second step in the web development process is to determine which hosting solution would best suit the needs of your website, both for the purpose of testing your website during the development process and for live production. A website can either be hosted on your home computer and traditional hosting services such as shared or dedicated or virtual private hosting are hosted on a cloud server. So, which type of system would best suit your needs? Well, before we answer these questions, there are several factors to consider. Will this site be accessible by the outside world or to public internet or only available to users within the local network? Will this site be very resource intensive? For example, we would be a small static site with only a few pages in the test data or a dynamic database driven website with a high volume of traffic. Perhaps even with large amount of video in high resolution image content. Do you need a hosting platform to be scalable, meaning do you expect to start off with a small site that can gradually grow into something much larger, which will require more resources? Or does your website require different amount of resources at different times? For example, see you run an online business that gets heavy traffic in certain amounts, but barely any in others. What type of programming technology will this site require? For example, will this site be a database-driven dynamic website? If so, will it require PHP or MySQL or Microsoft-based languages such as MySQL or ASP.NET? These are all very important considerations before making your decision. So, let's start with the first scenario. If you do not intend to make this site publicly accessible, then you will likely to be hosting it on a system with your own network. For this to work, you will need to configure this system to work as a server. In this course, we will show you how to set up your own computer as a server to preview your website project. This is necessary because certain file extensions that we'll be working with, such as in my school, will not work unless a testing service is created. Keep in mind that you do not need a testing server to view basic HTML pages. If your intention is to build a server and host a website that's accessible within your local area network or internet, we will also be demonstrating how to configure your server and routing settings so that the other computer within your network can access your server web directory. Now let's see on the other hand, and this is probably the case, that you do intend to make your site public available. Well, as you probably guessed, you could technically use the testing server we will be setting up on your system in an open certain port and your router to allow connection from the outside IP addresses rather than just the local connection. Please note this is highly complex and very susceptible to security vulnerability if not done correctly. Setting up a home computer for a public website is beyond the scope of this course. This is also not a very good practice and requires a static IP address, which can be quite costly and outweigh any potential benefits. The best solution to serve as your hosting solution is either a traditional web hosting package from a reputable company or a cloud hosting service. So, you are probably wondering what the difference between these two options. When we say traditional web hosting, we are referring to the pre-assembled packages offered by hosting companies such as GoDaddy or HostGator, just to name a couple. These are two examples among many other companies out there. The reason we identify them as traditional is because the latest web technology solution that most web developers are now gravitating toward is the cloud hosting. We will get to the cloud hosting in a minute. With the traditional web hosting, the server that your website is stored on is housed in the data center. Typically with hundreds or thousands of other servers, the servers are administered and maintained by the hosting company. This is probably as easy as it gets because you simply need to pay as a nominal hosting fee to store your web file and the hosting company takes care of the rest. Hosting company offer many different packages to suit your needs. Each package will fall under the shared hosting, dedicating hosting, or virtual private dedicating hosting. With the shared hosting package, your host allocates a certain amount of resources to your website. This illustration shows us what this setup looks like. The server configured with the Windows operating system, the entire server has two resource capacity of 2 GB of RAM, 512 GB of storage and 5 TB of monthly bandwidth allocation. With share hosting, your website would share this system resources with hundreds or even thousands of other websites depending on the server capacity. Each folder in the diagram represents one website. The amount of resources allocated to your website depends on the type of hosting package you register for. Let's take a look at an example of 3 standard hosting packages offered through a commonly used hosting company like GoDaddy. On the GoDaddy.com website, we can see that there are 3 shared hosting packages available. For $6.99 per month, GoDaddy will allow us to host one website domain with 100 GB of storage, 100 email addresses, and will provide us with the one free domain registration. Let's start with explaining what each of these means. One website means that this website package will allow one domain name to point to our website folder. So, for example, woodcourtmywebsite.com will point to the location of our web folder that resides on this particular server. 100 GB of storage simply means that the amount of disk space you get on the server for the purpose of storing your file. The larger the website, the more disk space you will need. 100 email addresses mean you get 100 customized email aliases that point to your domain. So, for example, me at mydomain.com, bandwidth refers to the amount of file transfer that these hosting packages allow. Remember, anytime somebody visits our website, they are essentially downloading all the content and images from the server. So, for example, if your home page is 1 megabyte and 200 people visit only your home page in 1 month, this will translate into the usage of 200 megabytes of bandwidth per month. You will notice it's a unlimited bandwidth for a couple of these for all of these packages here. Please note that this can be a bit misleading. Almost all hosting providers engage in a practiced effort to have clocking for shared hosting accounts. This is done so that your resources do not exceed a certain threshold. This threshold is set based on how much resource the other website on your servers require at the given time. So technically there is no unlimited resource allocation. As we move towards the right, we can see that the plan gets progressively more expensive but also offer better incentives. On the other point worth mentioning is that these are Linux plans, so these servers are hosting on the Linux operating system. These are also options to see the Windows plan. You might be wondering what the difference is. Well, in this course, we are going to explore in MySQL, which are internet-based programming language and database tool. These are very powerful, secure scripting language that offer a wide range of supports online. These are also best suited for Linux operating system. So, if you are going to use these programming language in the database tools and MySQL, Linux will be the best operating system for you to host your web website on. Other programming languages such as ASP.NET, Internet and SQL database are better suited for Windows-based server. We will be focusing on working on Linux-based server for this course. Dedicated servers are different than shared hosting in that the entire computer system in all its resources are only used for your website. As you probably guessed, this means much more power than the shared hosting packages, but also much more expense. Let's take a look at the Linux plan offered by the same company. We took a look at for the shared hosting packages. These are dedicated hosting packages offered by GoDaddy. We can see that the option 1 gives us 512 GB of storage, 2 GB of RAM, and 5 TB of bandwidth per month. Substantially more than any of these shared packages. One of the key benefits of dedicated hosting is you have absolute control over the configuration settings of your server. We will be exploring server configuration module to follow. Think of it as your own personal server just stored in the remote location. You can also add memory, hard drives, and bandwidth is required. You have complete flexibility on the type of hardware you install. Please note that because this is physical computer system, all these upgraded components will need to be installed by your server administrator. With dedicated hosting, you will typically be required to pay an administration fee for the management of your server if you do not do it yourself. This means your hosting company takes care of required updates, security checks, and any upgrades you need. As with the shared hosting, as we move towards the right, you see the cost increase, but so do the system resource and the specification. With virtual private hosting, the resources of the system are shared among a few websites. The number of sites sharing the system is significantly less than with the shared hosting. You are allocated a much larger portion of the server, operating capacity and bandwidth. The amount depends on the VPS packages you purchase. Virtual private servers do not have the same flexibility as dedicated hosting as well as hardware upgrades and configuration. You are generally constrained to the specification of the system that you initially signed up for. You can increase your share of the resource allocation to an extent. We are not beyond the physical capacity of the hardware on your server. On the GoDaddy.com website, we can see the VPS plan lies somewhere between the shared hosting and dedicated hosting in the term of the resources. The lowest VPS packages start with 1 GB of RAM, 40 GB of the storage, and 1 TB per month of the monthly bandwidth. As we move to the right, they get progressively higher in the term of resource allocation and also cost. Web hosting has revolutionized the web hosting industry because it's offering incredible flexibility at very low cost. Best of all, it's 100% scalable and completely in your control. Similar to traditional hosting, cloud servers are hosted in data centers across the globe. To understand how cloud hosting works, we need to understand what the cloud is. See, for example, we have a data center with a 2 servers, each with the following specification: 2 GB of RAM, 512 GB of hard drive storage, and 5 TB of monthly bandwidth allocation. If we were to combine the compute power storage and bandwidth to these 2 servers, we have 4 GB of total RAM, 1024 gigabytes of storage space and 10 terabytes of monthly bandwidth. You can think of this total pool of resources as a computing cloud. If we were to add additional servers, CPU, RAM, and storage, it will increase our cloud computing capacity. In this illustration, we now have 9 identical servers increasing our cloud capacity, including CPU, storage, RAM, and bandwidth by a multiple of 9. To understand how cloud hosting differs from a traditional hosting, let's first take a look at the downside of a traditional web hosting. With the traditional web hosting packages we explored, you probably noticed that the packages available were very centralized, meaning you pay a fixed monthly cost and are allocated a certain amount of resource per month, including CPU storage and bandwidth of the server. If we use anything less than this allocation, we still pay the same fixed monthly cost. If we went over our usage allowance, we pay a costly overusage fee. Another issue was the jump from the best shared hosting packages to our virtual packages was quite steep. There was no solution available if you needed more resources than the shared hosting cloud offer, but not quite as much as virtual hosting solution. If our website was very resource intensive, we could opt for dedicated server as powerful as the dedicated server was. What if we needed even more CPU, RAM, and storage space than the existing hardware configuration offered? We would need to physically keep adding and upgrading physical hardware components to make it more challenging. The server would be stored in the data center, so an on-site technician would be required to do the work. This could incur significant costs, and even more importantly, your website would be down for a period of time unless a backup server was created. Cloud hosting provides an efficient solution to all these issues. The key difference is the way in which resources from a cloud computing network can be utilized versus traditional hosting. Cloud server allow user to create virtual machines and extract as much as resources from the cloud is needed. The cloud itself can be infinitely scaled to meet the needs of the application it hosts. This means you can tap into the cloud and create a virtual server that best suits the needs and resource requirement of your website or application. Rather than being hosting on a single instance of a physical server as with traditional hosting, the website is hosting on a virtual partition. We draw its system resources from the extensive network of underlying physical servers. If you find this a little bit confusing, think of it as installing a tap to a large water supply when you need more water. You open the valve and increase the flow. If you need less, you do the opposite. The tap can be turned on and off at any time. In this comparison, the water supply is the cloud, the top control and the flow of the water in our case system. Resources such as a CPU, RAM, storage, and bandwidth. Cloud hosting feature, utility-style costing, meaning you only pay for what you use. Let's take a look at an example to better illustrate the concept of cloud hosting. You want to start a membership-based online movie streaming services like Netflix and market it to US-based customers. Since your site is new, you are not expecting too many subscribers or visitors to begin with, so you need to keep hosting costs at the minimum. Over time, you plan on bringing in investors in launching a marketing campaign for your service. You expect your service to grow exponentially and require a hosting solution that can become best accommodate your goals. Let's compare the life cycle of this business relative to traditional hosting services versus cloud hosting. With the traditional hosting, you will likely find a register for a shared hosting account, perhaps the most basic package to begin with, so you would have to set up your entire web application on this package. Setting up includes uploading files, testing your application, and configuring your database and email service. This is a fair bit of work, as you will see when we set up our own server. Throughout the first year of your streaming businesses, you see gradual increase in the traffic and periodically upgrade your shared hosting account to the best share plan available. This is relatively easy. There is no extra setup, just a simple upgrade and you are still on the same server. In the year 2, you start noticing your web page is frequently down and your hosting company provides you with a notice indicating that your web uses too much resources for the shared hosting package. This means you have no choice but to upgrade. Moving up the ladder, you start looking at the VPS hosting solution. The cheapest you find it for $40 per month. You realize the package would be way more than you need at this time, but there really isn't any alternative. You commit to a 1-year subscription plan for the basic VPS package. Since you have no move to the VPS server from the shared hosting account, you need to set up everything again. This means uploading, testing, and database and email configuration all again at the very minimum. You will like the experience of 1 or 2 day downtime is your domain name resolved to a new server. In the year 3, you notice a substantial decrease in traffic because the competitor recently launched a new streaming services. Your website barely gets any traffic, but you really don't want to go through the headache of downgrading back to the shared hosting package. You plan on coming out with a new feature that will likely win your visitor back in your far. Since you don't want to downgrade, you stay on your existing plan and continue to pay $40. a month for the remainder of the year, even though your resource requirement would probably have needed only $7 a month share hosting plan. In year 4, you introduce many exciting new features to your website and your customer quickly takes notice. You see a huge spike in traffic and none of the VPS packages are able to keep up with your resource requirement. To make matters worse, your hosting company keeps hitting you with costly over usage fees. So you decide to switch to the dedicated server, moving from the VPS to the dedicated server. You go through the setup all over again. This will be the third time that you have had to go through this. Also, since you changing server again, you can expect annual downtime of at least 1 to 2 days in your domain name resolved to this new server. In the year 5, your application continues to grow and outstrip the pre-assembled dedicated solution offered by your web host. Now your web hosting provider will need to start upgrading and adding physical components to your server to accommodate the new resource requirement. You start to notice your server administration built-in monthly fee really adding up. You also realize that after all this setup, downgrading to a lower VPS solution in slow months would be very impractical. Essentially, you are stuck and accommodated to paying for this dedicated server regardless of how much or how little system resource you actually use. Now let's take a look at what would have happened if you have initially registered for cloud hosting rather than traditional web hosting. In step 1, you would create a cloud hosting account with the provider of your choice and create a virtual server. You would configure your server so that it's to the level of traffic you expect to receive, which at this point isn't met. Let's look at some basic plan offered by a popular cloud hosting provider. Here we can see that for a $20 a month, we get trouble for the performance in every aspect than we did with the GoDaddy virtual private server solution within the same price range. Furthermore, these packages also offer poor or boot hosting. That means if you turn your server off, don't step, there is no monthly or annual subscription fees. You only pay for what you use. We use this particular website, Reno.com, because these pricing packages are fairly simple to understand. With your server set up with the cloud hosting, you are now in position to scale up your infrastructure up and down as your web application needs. So remember, in year 2, when we had a spike in traffic, all we need to do is tap into the cloud and upgrade our virtual machine. We can add a CPU, hard drive, more RAM, and more bandwidth, all that at click of button. Now what's about year 3, when we had a large drop in traffic? You can downsize your server just as easily as you can upgrade it with a click of your button. We can remove CPU, hard disk, memory, and bandwidth capacity. We could go on, but by now you probably see that due to flexibility, scalability, cost, efficiency, and reliability, cloud hosting is get considerably notoriety as the great hosting solution for website and application of all sizes and complexity, from small static website with only a few pages, the large-scale dynamic web application,